women who are already engaged, how can we empower them? How can we look at the fishers and farmers and make sure that we are helping them to move from where they are to where they need to be? And what kind of policies can we see and put in place to have that happening? And what kinds of, how do we help people to look at access to grants, microfinance, investment partnerships, and government support? How do we make all of those things happen? And I think that when we look at the kind of mentorship that is needed to have, where we have women who are actually reaching out to others and helping them to make that leap and to understand how to navigate the financial sector, I think this is really critical and important if we are to see progress moving forward. So I think the other thing is that our women need the kind of confidence that is necessary to move up in leadership. So, I want to tell a little story about my own experience, where I started in this whole aquaculture business. It was actually in fisheries, and my husband at the time was involved in the fishing industry, and my family is still involved in the fishing industry. But in those days, our boats used to come in, and I would sit on the boat while the fish and the products were being offloaded. And the people who I was facing were market women. And they didn't trust me. They didn't know, what is this brown lady doing sitting on a boat that's dispensing fish, because it didn't seem to be something which they were accustomed to. And initially, in fact, I've never been cursed like that in my life, because their thing was that if they make a lot of noise, they could actually steal some of the fish and create a commotion. And that was the way that they behaved. But they didn't know that they couldn't budge me. And so we became absolute friends with all of these market women. And I got to know them personally. I got to know their children, what they were doing with their families. I worked with these women to make sure that their children had access to the kind of education which they needed. I helped them to make sure that they actually, because these women had cash, they had money, but they weren't doing the right things for their own children. And so we set up classes for after school classes for the kids, where they actually learned how to use computers. They did their homework, that kind of thing. It was really, really important to make sure that we were helping these women not only with their own resources, but with their family coming up. So I think, that's a huge thing, that we spend time to help people move from one part, from where they are to where they need to be, to make steps in their careers. And this whole business of gender bias, this is something which I have faced in my own career. Absolutely, when I was in Geneva, it's a male-dominated area. Most of the ambassadors were male, and we had a group of female ambassadors who came together to create what we call the Lipstick Club. And in that Lipstick Club, we would work together to look at issues that were important. But for me, as the leader of my organization, I needed to get to the men that were also dominating most of the committees, making the big decisions. And I was approached by one of the male ambassadors to become the co-chair of a whiskey club. And luckily, my father had taught me how to drink whiskey. So we had this whiskey club at which we would meet once a month, and we would have a topic. And those topics were, something that was happening in the WTO. And we would bring the people who were on the committees, and we would discuss it informally there. I would even talk about my own organization and what it needed to move it forward. And through that whiskey club and through the Lipstick Club, I was able to have access to the decision makers inside of the global community that make up the WTO. And so we have to find, in wherever we are, what are the access points? How do we get to the access points? How do we join forces with others in order to be able to get to where we want to go? But in all of that, in every leadership position that I've ever had, I've always been looking at how can I help to accelerate the careers of women. And it's not always easy because of the family commitments that women have. And I have always noticed that sometimes when I've offered leadership roles to various women, we have seen that their own family commitments make them unable to take on more responsibilities. And I can say that in my own life, because of my family structure, I was able to take on more leadership roles because my family stepped in to help with my kids when I was not able to do that. And my husband also did that. So that whole structure of how we make linkages with others in order to make sure that we can take on these various roles, this is something which is important. And I have to say also that I didn't expand my leadership role until my kids were at a certain stage where I felt comfortable that if I moved to Geneva, they were in a position to carry on their own lives without the kind of supervision which I would normally have given them. So yes, we make changes all through our lives depending on our situation. Now, the other thing that I think is important for women who have the ability to be advocates on behalf of others is that they have a responsibility to do that. And we will never have changes in our industries unless there is a voice. The woman's voice is at the table. So joining industry organizations is critical, whether it is a Fishers Association, whether it's an industry like in Jamaica, we have the Jamaica Manufacturers and Exporters Association, or the Private Sector Organization of Jamaica. These are important platforms where we need to be engaged. Excuse me. So the other thing is, how do we talk to young women and encourage them that these are the kinds of careers that they ought to be looking at and where there are real opportunities? Sometimes I speak at my old high school and I go in and I talk with the girls who are in 5th and 6th forms. And this is, I guess, grades 11 and 12. And when you talk to them, they usually have a standard set of things that they're thinking about: doctor, lawyer, accountant, actuary. They have a very narrow view of where opportunities are. But in talking to them, where you talk about, what are the potential? Look at the challenges that the world has today. Look at the environmental issues that we're facing, and are you going to be part of that solution? Are you going to be go into a career that can actually help solve some of the problems that we're facing today? And I think that our oceans and the challenge that we face in our oceans today is something which is, it's going to take all of us to be part of the solution to dealing with the challenges of our oceans. So I think that this is really, really important. And when we think about it, empowering women in aquaculture therefore requires investment in policy, finance, mentorship, determination, stick-to-itiveness, if there's such a word, and visibility. You have to be able to have your voice heard. So, of course, I spoke earlier when I was being introduced, we talked about Alligator Head Foundation. And part of why I'm part of the Alligator Head Foundation, whose mandate it is to have thriving communities and thriving oceans, is that, of course, not only is my family involved in the seafood industry, but we're also maritime people. And what's happening in the world, how we can have sustainability in both our land-based activities and our ocean-based activities is very important. And so the blue economy, how we are looking at that, is going to be very important going forward. So I think, when I think about the state of our corals in the Caribbean, our reefs, the need for mangrove restoration, nature-based solutions in order to come up with solutions, we need women in this part of the looking at this kind of thing. And so this is, when we think about this, if we don't look and get engaged in these kinds of activities today, we are really down the road in terms of climate change, and we can see the impact, we can see the erosion that's taking place in our coastal areas. So there's so many new and interesting jobs in this area that it's important for us to think about this going forward. And when we think about this, what are we talking about? Because we also need to be able to harness technology. We need the kind of data analytics that is convincing, and which is actually allowing us to make the right kinds of decisions. We have AI today, which can help us also, but modern farming techniques would take into consideration climate change and climate change adapted farming techniques. Very important, so that we don't have the kind of runoff from our land-based activities into the oceans, polluting our oceans as well. It's very important to document our findings. And part of what I have been advocating at Alligator Head is that we actually publish our findings. We ourselves understand the challenges that we're facing in our sanctuary that we are working in. But there are so many other people across the world who are facing the same issues. So we're working towards changing that at Alligator Head, to be able to share our experiences with others and to look at the trends that are taking place and to be able to produce the right kind of analytical information that is very good for management of the resources going forward. So I think the role of women in protecting our marine ecosystem is really important, and we need to be building successful businesses around that, because when we create a sanctuary, we actually cut off the fishermen from being able to fish in those areas, and we have to find alternative livelihoods for these people. They're making the ultimate sacrifice. And so I think aquaculture is one of the methods that we can use to find alternative livelihoods, whether it is vertical fish farming, whether it is some other kind of mariculture activity. This is really important for us to be able to find alternatives. So I think, when we look at a couple of the people who are doing things, the International Blue Economy Coalition, they have launched a program to support women in marine industries. You have my old organization, the International Trade Center, which has created a thing called She Traders, which connects women to other women right across the world in new markets. And when we also look, there is a very successful women-led fishers cooperative in Latin America, which has increased community resilience. So I think then if we look back at that, other industries have implemented solutions to to finding new ways and innovations to keep their own entities going, their own industries going. So I think it's time that in the Caribbean, aquaculture actually takes its place. And we can't really sit on our laurels when we have solutions to many of the problems which our people are facing. So in closing, I'd like to say, I see our Caribbean women in aquaculture as being powerful change makers, but we must be intentional about breaking barriers. They're not going to break by themselves. We need to commit to supporting other women through mentorship, through visibility, through advocacy. And I think that, you know, when we think about if we rise by lifting others, then let's ensure that women in aquaculture don't just participate, but lead. So with that, I'd like to stop and maybe we could take some questions.
Yes, thank you, Patricia. Let's start a discussion. I'll start with some questions that we've prepared for Patricia, but please, you in the audience, go ahead and write down your questions, and then I'll read it, and I'll read it after. So, Patricia, I'd like to start with the women's economic empowerment topic. And I know you've led the UN Secretary General's high-level panel on this particular subject. So I'd like to start with it might seem basic, but I call it a fundamental question. From a global perspective, why is women's economic empowerment so important?
I think the first thing that we need to know is that women reinvest 90% of their income in their families and communities. So it drives social change, and it also is a way of breaking the cycle of poverty. What we also see is that we've read McKinsey and others have produced documents which show that companies with diverse leadership perform better financially. And of course, if we want to see equality, it's about economic growth and innovation. It's really important to be able to have everyone have access in equal amounts. And right now, this is not the case. And, you know, this 134 years or 35 years that you read about, where it will take us to, you know, gender-based equality to actually take place. This is something which is just not acceptable. And as a woman who has been able to do whatever she wanted to do, and go out there and try and make a difference, I think it's a right. It's actually a human right. So this is important.
Thank you. And now getting a bit more specific to the region, what key strategies do you believe are essential for moving the needle to women in terms of women economic empowerment, particularly in the Caribbean? What are those key strategies that you think should be implemented?
Well, you know, the work that we're doing now on speaking to the financial institutions to educate them on how to provide finance to women-owned enterprises. This is a huge barrier. And we have to break that norm that we currently have. So there has to be policy reform at the private sector level, because while government itself is producing laws which say women can, well, this is my first experience trying to get a loan. When I first went to a bank to get a loan, I was told that my husband had to give me permission to get a loan. And so that's one of the loans that one of the laws that I advocated for change, and that change actually has taken place in Jamaica. I think right across the Caribbean, women do actually have the ability to get loans without having to get permission from their husbands. So the whole policy framework the whole policy framework around which both government and private sector are understanding how they can play a role is really important. That's very, very important. Women themselves who are successful or who are in a place to be able to help others. You don't have to be the top, you don't have to be the CEO to be a mentor. You can be in middle management, you can even be somewhere near the bottom, and you can help others to move up the chain. And that's going to be really important. Mentorship and sponsorship, very, very important, that we need to see that kind of leadership. And then, you know, showcasing female role models. That's a traditional thing. You know, we see on television, we see on, you know, media, so many men being showcased. What about our women? We need to be able to showcase our role models, and to let our young women understand where the opportunities are.
Thank you, Patricia. And I'm seeing that the clock is running this morning really quickly. So let's move to a different topic now. What you just mentioned happens in a very different sphere than we as individuals operate, as scientists, entrepreneurs. But let's provide some actionable pointers for the audience. Specifically in the Caribbean, how can women can benefit from international opportunities, specifically in trade?
Well, I think I pointed to a couple of those before. Excuse me. If we look at e-commerce, I think that this is the future. That if we want, in the Caribbean, we have very, very small markets. And if we are small companies, then e-commerce is actually an avenue that we can use to be able to get to wider markets. So having a website, having a presence on social media, and using social media as a means of presenting what product it is that you have to sell, or what service it is that you have to sell. I think these are very important. The skills of using social media now to be able to present yourself, and websites, very, very important. And I think that there are Caribbean Export and a number of other entities that exist, can help you in developing those skill sets. And I know that they're always putting on training programs. Regional trade networks, Caribbean Export, something that I think that you need to be engaged with. Caribbean Women for International Trade, and now you have Caribbean Women in Aquaculture. I think these are entities that you really should get engaged in. And of course, in terms of your own skills and technology to stay competitive, you've got to keep on top of it. And, you know, my kids push me because they're always changing the way that they communicate, and I have to keep changing and understanding how to use technology also. So this is something that's very, very important, that we communicate differently and we communicate to the world.
Thank you, Patricia. I think we have a question from the audience, and this is from Marilyn Teofil. She says, concerning finance, do you think women have to use alternative solutions? If yes, can you give us an example, please?
Well, I think that we have always, you know, if we don't have access to the normal banking, we do have families, we do have friends, and in the old days, this was the way that that people progressed. This is what they did. They went to their families and friends and raised money. And today we have structures, proper structures, financial structures that allow for that kind of thing, where, you know, you don't have to do it informally anymore. We can actually, through the kind of companies that we operate, we can offer shares to those who provide financing for us. There are also cooperatives that are active and which provide support. So it's not simply the international financial institutions or private equity or commercial banks, but I think that we can look at a number of other institutions that are there to help really small entities. But I think, you know, the family thing is also important that we think about that.
Thanks, Patricia. Julie, you have your hand raised over here, and you need it.
Yes, there's a question from Stephanie. How can we collaborate and promote women in aquaculture, help them to gain better market access, especially when ASC, Stephanie, you might need to tell us what that is. Certifications are very costly, and in developing countries, top-down regulations are not effective, and we need the seafood consumer market to drive more sustainable innovation in aquaculture and help identify women in this field to help them gain equal pay and investment opportunities.
Well, I'm actually chairperson of what they call the Trade Facilitation Task Force in Jamaica here. And one of my challenges is to make access to a number of these certification bodies, and also make it simpler to have the kind of certification which is necessary for international markets. And that currently, you know, we have too many entities that are duplicating efforts. And so my job is to try and help to simplify the government side of things. Currently on our border, we have over 20 agencies that are operating on our border, that you touch points depending on what product you're selling. And that is a hindrance in itself. In the first world, you only have 2. We have 20. So you can just imagine the level of bureaucracy for a very small entity to try and find their way around that. So part of what we're doing is to help to simplify that process. But also, we have an organization here which is helping to ensure that the bodies that are doing the certification are actually certified globally, so that they're not just certified for Caribbean wide, but they're certified globally, so that the certification which you get in your country now will be equal to the certification that is necessary to enter most international markets, mainly the US and European Union. And that's important, because if not, then you have to go through so many other layers of processes if external governments don't accept the certification which your own government bodies provide. So, you know, this is not an easy thing, and this is probably one of the major challenges. If you're in the seafood business, you need to make sure that you have access to the kind of certification which gives you market access. And so very important that we work with governments to make this easier and easier. But it's also a question of your own way of working, to make sure that you are establishing the practices in your entity which allow for traceability, so that when you go to be certified, that it's clear that you have been following the international processes. And this is important. Recently, my sons were involved with the government and a number of other entities in getting MSC certification for our conch industry. The conch industry has never had MSC certification anywhere in the world. So this was the first in the world that this has taken place. And this was 2 years of slogging, going through all the processes to make sure that companies were following the kinds of things that they needed to do, and that governments were providing the kind of management which was necessary for this global certification to take place. I hope that helps. It's tough. There's no easy way, unfortunately, when we're talking about feeding people and providing food. We have to follow those global standards.
Thank you, Patricia. Yes, it is tough, but it's also very exciting to hear when we, we as the people, as humanity, unlock a new species as a certified species. I mean, it was tough, but it was certainly worth it. Okay, so time, as I said, is a speedy guy this morning. So Patricia, we are deeply grateful for your presence and the wealth of the experience that you have shared with us today. So thank you so much for your time and for being such a powerful voice in the conversation in the industry and for the region. Thank you so much. And if we had a sound, this would be when people would clap, but this is a Zoom
Or we can
meeting,
clap
so
anyway.
yes, you can clap anyway. I don't think if your microphones are muted, but anyway, feel that from me and from the audience for sure. So we have to wrap up this session. Thank you so much, and I'll just present some final remarks and just a little um
Well, I'd like to
sure.
thank our sponsors for sure.
Yep.
I can tell you getting sponsorship was very difficult. It has always been difficult for scientists, and that's one of the reasons why we want to have these discussions, because we feel like as scientists we're kind of left off of the conversation. So BioMar has always been with us. We can't thank them enough. And Digital Grace and Hazel from Number 9 have jumped right in. Mariana, I can't thank you enough for jumping in and helping us to get this together. And our other sponsors that came in at the last minute, Moss Solutions from St. Lucia Seaweed Farmer, and the World Aquaculture Society, the Latin American Caribbean chapter, and Aquasafra and Nexus Distribution. So we thank you all for helping to make this possible.
Yes, and oh,
thank
go
you
ahead,
very
Patricia.
much for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity, and I'm really wishing this organization great success, because we need you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
So
Patricia.
much.
So thank you, everyone. I'm just putting here the next. I don't see if you can see my screen, right?
Yes, go
Yes.
ahead.
Yes, you can see the whole sessions that are gonna be happening throughout this summit. Take a screenshot and you'll find us this in the website as well. So thank you. Thank you very much for being here. This was a great way to start our week, to start the summit. So it's all thank you and smiles from this side.
And see you
Thank you
this
so much.
afternoon. If you're coming, come and check us out, and see you for the rest of the week. So thank you, everybody. Thank you so much, Pat. We really appreciate you.
Good. Take care.
Thanks, guys.